At the Lake, a novel by Lou Grant. Chapter 1, Section 1. It was a late Friday afternoon in early January 1967, almost closing time at the factory. Freezing winds made quaffs look like rats' nests, and comb-overs stood up like roosters' crests. No amount of clothing kept the cold from penetrating to the bone. This was a typical northern New Jersey winter. The weatherman, that bastion of accuracy, had predicted 6 degrees for that night, a virtual heat wave. It had been 6 below the night before. The parking lot around the drab factory building was filthy with 2-day-old snow and was jammed with rusting cars. Nothing looked new enough to bother keeping clean. The old munitions factory had been belching smoke since before most of the people in the town of Pumpkin Pond had been born, and most of them worked there now. Inside the factory, the din of machinery made it hard to hear your thoughts. It smelled of machine oil and hot metal, the kind of smells that stayed in your hair and clothes after work, and even after a hot shower didn't take the memory of it out of your nostrils. 3 generations of Pumpkinians, someone on the city council had once suggested Pumpkinites, but Old Man Peavy said it sounded like a skin condition. Male and female hunched over large and small workstations, putting tiny pieces of glittering brass together with fingers that knew every notch and crevice in the metal. Most of them could have done their jobs blindfolded. The foreman, Joe Burke, was in his 50s. He was a quiet man with a crew cut, acting very much in charge. He strolled from station to station with his trusty clipboard. He had worked these machines himself when he was a kid, and even after 10 years as foreman, he could still work any machine in the place. He strolled past a double workstation where 2 women intently manipulated the tiny brass cylinders and springs. 19-year-old Ginny McNally worked one of those machines. She was frowning in concentration as her nimble fingers moved quickly over the familiar pieces. She still wore her shoulder-length auburn hair in pigtails that bounced against her ears, a tribute to her childhood or an attempt to avoid growing up. She didn't know and she didn't care. It was easier than fussing with curlers and hairspray. Her makeup was sparse, a little mascara and shadow on her green eyes, a touch of pale lipstick. Her late father's old white shirt hung to the thighs of her faded dungarees. Wearing his shirts was how she kept his memory alive in her heart. She had been working at the factory for a year and a half, since a disastrous attempt to work in the Pumpkin Diner after high school graduation. The boss had liked her a little too much, and she had found herself dodging his groping hands while balancing breakfast trays and refilling coffee cups. After 3 weeks of scooting her hips to the side to avoid his unwanted pats on her posterior, she had finally had enough. 10 minutes after she'd started working, one warm summer day, he had connected with her backside, startling her into dropping 3 plates of scrambled eggs with sausage and toast, 3 OJs, and 3 coffees. The crashing crockery had echoed off the walls and was still echoing long after she had yelled, "I quit," and bolted out the door. She had spent the rest of that day driving around, afraid to go home and tell her mother that she'd quit. Her mother would have a conniption fit if she knew. Ginny had tried to make a mental list of all the places in town where she might quickly gain employment, but nothing had come to mind. There just wasn't any place in this tiny burg where she wanted to work. Pumpkin Pond was a small town of 7,000, situated in the narrowest part of Pumpkin County, New Jersey. People who left and came back were surprised to find what a small town they had actually come from. Downtown was barely 2 blocks long and no buildings more than 2 stories tall. Across from the Colonial Theater there was the diner Ginny had previously worked in, a little place with half a dozen red vinyl booths. You could still get a 10-cent cup of coffee there. Chrome-edged stools lined the counter, and the smell of bacon grease permeated the place all day and into the night. The drugstore stood on the corner, not far from the high school. Next to the drugstore was the tiny First National Bank, where 3 tellers were usually 2 tellers too many. The town's only dentist was upstairs from the realtor, who didn't get out much because the real estate market wasn't exactly hopping around here. The houses were old and often needed a good paint job. Once they were charming, with porches on their fronts where neighbors sat and sipped lemonades in summer while watching the goings-on with not-so-subtle interest. Now most of the homes had cracked and peeling paint and at least a few rails missing from the gray picket fences. Everyone knew everyone's name and their kids and their friends and their second cousins from down the shore. You could spend all day at a friend's house, and her mom would feed you and let you use their bathroom and smack your bottom if you said a naughty word, then call your mom and tell on you so you got smacked again when you got home. And milk was delivered and bread, and your dry cleaning picked up and delivered, and you knew your mailman by name and said hello to him every day. And you all worked at the factory at the end of the town, because unlike the diner, or the gas station, or the grocery store, it was full-time, and it had at least some union benefits for you and your family if you needed them. Ginny had wished she had her guitar with her that summer day. It often calmed and inspired her. But her mind kept racing back to, where will I get a job? No other jobs had been available, so she found herself here at the factory like everyone else, doing the same repetitive work day after day for low wages and a few benefits. And she'd found that her fingers were more nimble than she'd even imagined. She had learned the job quickly and was one of the fastest workers on the floor. It had surprised her, but not pleased her. What good was it, after all? It wasn't creative, she knew. It was a paycheck. She had another outlet for creativity that also required nimble fingers. After work each day, she'd spend all her evenings practicing her guitar. Classical guitar. She played rock and folk too, but the classical music filled her with such beauty that it was all she really ever wanted to do. She thought of her guitar now, of spending the evening practicing, and it made her think of her father. It had been 6 years since Jack McNally's death. He had been rushing to get home for his wife's birthday when he had lost control of his car in the rain. It had spun out and slammed head-on into a bridge abutment. They said he had been killed instantly. End of section 1.